So this is our last session for this particular seminar course, and we have covered an enormous amount of material. Starting, I believe, our first 3 weeks, we looked at the case for original monotheism. I've converted those lectures into article text, very long 20-page article. We're going to do the same thing for all the material we've covered since then as well on these last, 9 weeks or more on the God who is, the classical and modern arguments for the existence of God. So we'll be converting all of that to article text as well. It has to be 50 pages or more, but it will be something that people can go to our website, download. Again, we've covered so much material, and so much of it is so very, very relevant. And I realize that none of us can memorize all of this material, but it's available for you to share with others who might have serious questions about, they're struggling with belief in God and so on. And as we've made rather clear throughout this course, believing in the existence of God is absolutely essential, but it's insufficient. I mean, we are Christians. We're not just theists. And so we understand that this is really only an elementary foundation for the Christian faith. But having said that, it's absolutely essential material, obviously. And like me, you've never heard a substantive sermon or a series of sermons on why we should believe in God. You would think that topic might come up occasionally, but it doesn't. So we want to provide some very quality material that you can access for the future. Because we know that increasingly more and more people here in America claim that they do not believe in God. Those who self-identify as atheists or agnostics, the number is going up more all the time, just as affiliation with all the major Christian denominations, from Roman Catholic to Baptist and everything in between, that's all falling a lot over the last 10 years as well. So we are becoming a more secularized nation, and it provides us with more and more of an opportunity to be a source of true light. Millie? Am I coming through loud and clear on the Zoom? And Wayman, I am. Wayman says I'm coming through just fine.
It's just a little garbled.
Oh, really? Is it because I have my mouth full? No. Well,
that's better.
Continues, and maybe there's something we need to do up here. Thank you, Janet. Yes.
When we were at the Unshaken Faith Conference recently, Natasha Crane gave the statistics for, I think this was Barna, the most recent research. It's only 4% of Americans are truly Christians in their
who
with a biblical worldview.
Yeah, who hold to a biblical worldview.
It was 6% several years ago, but it's down to 4% now. And that's when they ask the questions like, have you been born again?
See, and what a commentary that is on church education in America.
Right. And 2% of
2% of millennials, according to Barna surveys, hold to a consistent biblical worldview. And all this easy believism that's spouted out in these evangelical churches, if there was ever a time when we needed quality, in-depth Christian education, it's today. And yet it seems that churches that provide that are so very rare. The times they are a changing, as Bob Dylan wrote 60 years ago, but certainly not changing for the better, that's for sure. But again, it provides such an opportunity. In one sense, when the level of nominal Christianity continues to fall, that's not totally bad. Now, the case for nominal Christianity is that at least people who nominally associated with Christian faith, oftentimes, if not specific beliefs, at least in general, their behavior was a little bit more decent and civil and moral and so on. But we know that again does not constitute true, authentic Christianity. But nonetheless, it kept the forces of evil somewhat at bay. But all that's collapsed, as we know. And so if there was ever a time in American Christian history to understand that as Christians, we're called to live by totally different standards and values and priorities, true Christianity has always been a countercultural force. And we need to seriously recapture that concept. But anyway, getting back to the point that we've covered so much material in our class over the last 11 or 12 weeks. And this is our final session. And we're going to begin with Donna finishing the section that she started last week on why non-believers will not believe. And she put forth 3 reasons why people reject the Christian faith and just reject the God of the Bible. And one is intellectual. And, when you probe beneath the surface, there's nothing there to these intellectual arguments against the Christian faith and against belief in God. Also, the emotional issues, though, well, that's another matter. That's considerably more complex. And then the volitional. And I think maybe that's, you can start at any point you'd like, but I think that might be where you were when we ended our session last week. So Donna, thank you very much looking forward to hearing the rest of your presentation on why won't they believe.
All right, hello, everybody. Let's see if I can get up here without knocking anything over. So Jeffrey gave the synopsis. That was good. We have our 3 different categories, and we have just gotten into the volitional, the acts of will, where I think I had said, I think some people use the intellectual and emotional as excuses not to believe in God, when really it's really a heart issue. It's really a will issue for the most part. And I think we had gotten to Os Guinness last week, where we had a quote from him, and I believe it was probably on the end of that first page or right at the beginning of the second page. But we'll start there because I think that's where we were. We're in his book, Fool's Talk, Recovering the Art of Christian Persuasion. So he goes on to say, comments on the psychological realities that impinge upon belief in Christ. And he says we should never view unbelief as flatly theoretical, loftily neutral, or merely as a worldview that people just happen to have. However suave and cool its attitudes and however rational its arguments many sometimes appear to be, unbelief is different in its heart. Deep down, the unbelieving heart is active, willful, deliberate, egoistic, devious, scheming, unrelenting in its open refusal and its deliberate rebellion and its total resistance to God and the full truth of his reality. And it can never be countered by purely intellectual arguments that ignore the power of the dark secret in his heart. The heart of apologetics is the apologetics of the heart. So We do look at that volition, and it is in the heart. You can make all the arguments that you want and throw things out there, but it really is that, it's that deep down refusal to accept truth. So there are many candid comments, actually from leading atheists, that don't have, they don't equivocate. They're bold with their unbelief. So Friedrich Nietzsche goes, if one were to prove this God of the Christians to us, we should be even less able to believe in him. So that willful blindness, it is our preference that decides against Christianity, not arguments. So he doesn't even pretend that it's the arguments, it's just that they just don't want to. New York philosopher Thomas Nagel, he says, I want atheism to be true and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. My guess is that this cosmic authority problem is not a rare condition and that it is responsible for much of the scientism and reductionism of our time. And to me, that phrase, I hope there is no God, that's just, it's counterintuitive. It's not, the only hope there is in God. So to actually hope there is no God, that makes no sense to me.
It's so irrational. Basically, what these people are saying is, I hope when my short few years in this life end, I hope I just rot away and
Right.
cease to exist. I mean, who could possibly hope for that?
Hope is not the word. I mean, it doesn't, yeah, it's counterintuitive to me. It's the opposite of how hope, I think, should be used in our vocabulary. We have Robert Ingersoll, a renowned orator in the late 1800s. He actually was one of the first to popularize higher criticism of the Bible, humanistic philosophy, and scientific rationalism. So we have that to thank him for in the late 1800s. But in his essay, Why I Am an Agnostic, he puts it out there pretty clearly. When I became convinced that the universe is natural, that all the ghosts and gods are myths, they're entered into my brain, into my soul, which how can there be a soul if there's no God? But anyway, the sense, the feeling, the joy of freedom, the walls of my prison crumbled and fell. I was no longer a servant, a serf, or a slave. There was for me no master in all the wide world, not even in infinite space. I was free to think, to express my thoughts, free to live to my own ideal, free to live for myself and those I loved, free from devils, ghosts, and gods. For the first time, I was free. There was no prohibited places. I was free. I stood erect and fearlessly, joyously faced all the world, which again is just it's a whole contradiction of what makes our world beautiful and makes us free is that belief in God and the everlasting and the transcendent. I can't imagine finding hope and freedom and joy in not believing in anything. We go on, there's a Christian scholar and author, Mary Poplin, commenting on her pre-Christian lifestyle. I believe she was very much New Agey, right?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I still remember the exhilaration of thinking I was living my life in ultimate freedom. I reveled in being a free spirit. Gradually, the boundaries of what I wanted and what I would do to get it expanded, slowly at first, exponentially as I got older, until I was bored with what I had gotten and then moved on to the next thrill. In the wake of my desires, I left any number of serious problems for other people to clean up. The paradox was that when I thought I was most free, responsible, and reasonable, I was least. I was a slave to my own desires and to the spirits that drove them. Real freedom is something altogether. It starts on the inside. And I think that's an interesting point. She's saying that when in the wake of my desires, when I felt most free, that was actually when she caused the most heartache and problems for those around her. It's such a selfish way to live, that we're purely my desires and what I want, and without even considering those around you and what's going to happen to them as you blow through their world as your free spirit.
We were at the Colson Fellows Conference in Washington in 2019, and we get on the elevator and she's on the elevator.
Wow.
And she spoke at one of the forums and I
Yeah.
recognized her.
Wow.
So, yeah, she made a complete, turnaround. And I think in her, I don't know if it was her book I read or whatever, but yes, her sexual life, I mean,
Yeah, she
she
was
had at
quite-
least one abortion and maybe more. She was, yeah.
She was she was embraced all of that, didn't she,
Yes.
in the sixties and seventies, I think, or a little later, yeah. Yeah.
She made a complete.
Did she go with, isn't she the one who went with Mother Teresa? Or was that somebody else?
Yes,
Yeah,
actually, for a year or so.
yeah, so, anyway, so,
She wrote a book on
yes,
her experience, yeah.
I thought so, but, amazing, wonderful that she was able to come around and, turn her life around, or God was. So we go on, we have the renowned secular humanist, Sir Julian Huxley, and he wrote, "The sense of spiritual relief which comes from rejecting the idea of God as a supernatural being is enormous." And then his cousin, Aldous Huxley, he candidly admitted that the reason most of his colleagues were so eager to accept the theory of evolution is that the idea of God interfered with their sexual desires. And I think that's probably one of the most honest statements they could make. I really think that is at the root of a lot of people's rejection of God, and especially God of the Bible, is their sexual proclivities. But he goes on to say, "I had motives for not wanting the world to have meaning, consequently assumed that it had none, and was able without difficulty to find satisfying reasons for that assumption. For myself, as for most of my contemporaries, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. The liberation we sought was simultaneously liberation from a certain political and economic system and liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom." So in a world where sexual freedom is tantamount, that's at the top of the pyramid apparently now. So if you can't do what you feel like you want to do, then that's why you reject God. And at least he's honest about it, if nothing else, but it's so shallow and empty and meaningless. But he wanted it to be meaningless, which is, I can't imagine that, reveling in the meaninglessness, so.
These are supposed to be great thinkers.
Right, that just very, dismiss things without really thinking about it. We have a Jean Edward Veith noted, it's kind of a political statement, and the left isn't motivated by the economic policies where this quote comes from. But he said, noted that this is the real agenda of the secular left. It's not just social conservatives who have a cultural agenda. The true agenda of the left is not so much economic or big government as cultural. The goal of the left is the liberation of mankind from traditional institutions and codes of behavior, especially moral codes. It seeks a restoration of a state of nature, one of absolute individual liberty. While many conservatives focus on free market economics and small government, they do not realize that hardcore leftists do not really care much about such things. Meanwhile, the social liberals march through their culture largely unopposed. And I think we have seen that, much to our dismay, that I think Christians largely thought, oh, that'll go away, or it'll swing back, or they could possibly really want that. That's what I've thought most of my life. But we're now waking up to the reality that we should have been awake a long time ago. We should have been woke about a long time ago to see what they really were trying to do in overthrowing the norms and the traditions and the structures of society that took so long to build. And we just look the other way, sadly. In an essay by Czesław Miłosz, it's called "The Discrete Charm of Nihilism," identifies the bottom line issue related to atheistic naturalism. According to Miłosz, atheism provides an escape from the reality of guilt associated with one's sin and the fear associated with the eternal divine punishment. He writes, "A true opium of the people is a belief in nothingness after death, the huge solace of thinking that for our betrayals, greed, cowardice, murders, we are not going to be judged." I thought that was profound. I think if you were to dig deep, I think most atheists, I think that might be it. I mean, because they don't have to worry. They can do whatever they want, and there's no guilt, and there's no punishment, and there's nothing later. But I don't believe I'd ever heard it stated that way. The true opium of the people is to believe there isn't a God, not to believe there is one. I thought that was profound and right on. We have Dinesh D'Souza who says in his book, What's So Great About Christianity? If God does not exist, the 7 deadly sins, are not terrors to be overcome, but temptations to be enjoyed. So we have pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. And I think I can say every single one of those is celebrated today. Our world is upside down. You look at sloth, people don't want to work anymore. Work is just for, they're just for those people who don't know any better. We have wrath. If you disagree with someone, you're canceled. And that's it. It doesn't matter. Gluttony. But now you can't tell a person that's overweight that it's unhealthy because you hurt their self-esteem or you're attacking them. Gluttony is not good for you. Envy, lust, greed, pride, all of these things now, they're no longer vices, they're virtues, and people celebrate them and look down on you if you don't, because you're backwards. D'Souza goes on to summarize the issue. My conclusion is that contrary to popular belief, atheism is not primarily an intellectual revolt. It is a moral revolt. Atheists don't find God invisible so much as objectionable. The atheist seeks to get rid of a moral judgment by getting rid of the judge. And I think that's true. So in the end, it's all about the will. And Jeffrey put some music in here, the Moody Blues, as they say, in Nights in White Satin. We can all sing, but some try to tell me. Both the Pauls could. My Paul can sing, but yeah. But some try to tell me thoughts they cannot defend. Just what you want to be, you will be in the end. And then we have Paul Simon, that other sage in the Boxer. A man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. And that is for sure where people are today. But by their own confessions, atheists only confirm what the Bible says about them and their motives. Psalm 14:1 and 53:1, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good. A fool, in Hebrew, Nabal, means those who are willfully ignorant. They are stupid people, and their stupidity leads them to moral degeneracy. Their souls are sick, as the Apostle Paul noted in Romans 1 and 2. Their destiny is moral degeneracy and spiritual death. So I think that was all I have, but I mean, it just seems so clear, so crystal clear that it really is just, it's like a little kid going, I want to do what I want to do, and I don't want anybody to tell me what I can't do. And without realizing that we are not our own, that we do not create ourselves, and that we do, there is a transcendent power that cares and loves us, and that we will answer to, whether their true opium, and that there isn't one, there really is, so they can kid themselves all they want. I did want to tell about one resource that John Durham told me about, and probably a lot of others people, but Kim Boa has a great website and organization, and I looked at it, and my goodness, you could be on that website forever and never get all the information. But he addresses these issues, a lot of them one by one, and he's got a forum on Monday nights that you can sign up for and listen to him go over a lot of these questions in depth. So that was I thought that was very interesting, and it's just too much information out there to bring it all in. But anyway, thanks. Anybody have any comments, questions that I may or may not be able to answer?
Well, Frank Turek's got that book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist.
Yes.
And I think one of his things was, if he talked to someone and he said, if this is true, would you believe it? And a lot of times they will not, and it's speaking to what you're saying. If they just intentionally, willfully turn their backs.
Right.
They don't want to know. They don't want to believe.
I'm actually reading that book now, actually in a book club, we're reading it, but the information is amazing. And I've only read the first 5 or 6 chapters, but very great information, and explains What we've gone over too, the cosmological and teleological, all of those, it explains them very well, too, so, yeah. All right,
Yeah,
There
it's
we go.
just the irresponsibility inherent in all of these people and their rejections.
it is,
And they pose as great intellectuals,
Right.
great thinkers.
Right.
They're so incredibly shallow. It's just hard to believe.
immature. I
Yeah.
mean, just really, again, that willful, just like a little kid, they just don't want anybody to tell them what to do, which seems to be the nut, the center of it. Yes, Bruce.
I've got a fantasy that someday I'm gonna write a book. And it's called God Gets It Right Again.
God, what?
God Gets It Right Again.
Yeah.
There's so many things that as you get older and think about stuff, you realize that, you know, the Bible and God was right from the beginning, like I should be surprised, you know. Right? And the one that really strikes me is that this issue of wanting to be sitting on the throne of your life, which is really what this is all about.
Yes.
This is why Thomas Nagel doesn't want a God. It's not because he thinks he's gonna be tortured in hell or that there could be a judgment of it, just right here in the here and now, which is all we know. I don't want anybody looking over my shoulder, some guy with a long white beard and a checklist, you know, demerits and stuff like that. I just don't want to deal with that. But when the serpent came to Eve, he said, you could be like God. Right? You could be like God. That is the fundamental temptation of mankind, to put ourselves on the throne and for ourselves to be in control. And everybody has it. You don't have to learn it. It sort of comes with the DNA of the programming. It's learning how to deal with it appropriately that is so difficult, right? But that's what you're seeing with these people. That's why they're not, they don't want to hear, they don't want to believe, you know. Someone says, I don't believe in God. And my question is, well, so what kind of God is it you don't believe in? You know, well, they've got some cockamamie idea of what God is, you know. And well, if God were different than that, would you want to know? No. Really don't want to know.
Right.
Don't want to discuss it. So it's just.
So we
Know
could,
what you can do.
like Nietzsche said, you could present all the arguments, they're still not gonna believe.
Yeah.
Right, it's just, they don't want to. Sad.
What a commentary
Yes,
on
yes,
human nature. This is.
which is so obvious all around us, so.
And these are all people, all these people you quoted, I mean, are people that have been very influential in their day.
Right, like I said, supposedly great thinkers.
Great thinkers and wise men. Yeah, yeah. So we oftentimes say if we didn't know better, we might think there's something fundamentally wrong with human nature. If we didn't prefer to think otherwise. Okay. So those are priceless quotes, though. They really nail the problem of disbelief, and don't use history or logic or anything else on me. I just don't want to believe that there's a God to whom I'm accountable. So as we say, I mean, as we've said several times in the course, I mean, the Christian faith takes us well beyond what we're talking about here, but belief in God is essential. Obviously, it's just not, you know, sufficient. We have to deal with the reality of Jesus Christ as well. Well, thanks, Donna. Appreciate that. So let's move on here to the Summa of the course. And that's page 29, if you're following along in your notes. So in our course, we've basically used what in philosophy we refer to as a cumulative case approach for making the case for a creator. And as we stated at the outset, no single argument for the existence of God is necessarily conclusive. Therefore, we have to apply the logical principle of abduction. And abduction is basically inference to the best explanation, when we consider all the options, what is, you know, the ultimate consuming truth that we need to adhere to. And so we assess the case for a creator based on the most reasonable assessment of all of the evidence. And we've talked about an awful lot of it in this course, but all the evidence that we can derive from philosophy and from biblical theology and from science. The old argument that science and Christian faith are contradictory, of course, you know, that's been dispelled long, long ago. We also rely on the truths, if you can ascertain the truths, that we derive from anthropology. Now, anthropology, like so many of these academic disciplines, has been pretty thoroughly perverted, but there is an essential truth in anthropology. Also, what can we glean from archaeology, from history, and even from psychology, for that matter? And they all bolster the case for the creator, as we've delved into the last several weeks. Now, the search for God should not be, though, just a sterile intellectual pursuit. And as we've emphasized, no arguments can ever, quote, prove the existence of God, but we can't, quote, prove that we're experiencing reality right now. It's just that there's no good reason to think otherwise, isn't there? So no amount of evidence, though, is ever going to convince a skeptic whose heart is hardened and whose mind is closed to the reality of God. And the quotes that you mentioned last week and tonight, you know, just further accentuate that. So in a sense, Augustine was ultimately right, and that is that faith must precede understanding. And faith includes a humble recognition that we are not omniscient, and that mystery is a part of the reality of life. Now, a theistic worldview, a God-centered worldview, provides the best explanation that we can possibly account for the origins of the universe, for instance. There's no possible argument to be made outside of a God, an infinite, eternal God, such as is revealed in the Bible. So the universe's origin from nothing, the fact that the universe is packed with power, heat energy, atomic energy, and other forces, it must have been brought into existence by a mighty force. It's almost inconceivable in its power and might. Also, the theistic worldview provides the best explanation to account for the intricate design of the universe and the Earth's fitness for life. Again, it's the only realm of existence that we know of in the universe that would support life, and especially ultra sophisticated life, like human life, for instance. Also, think about the incredible design of the human body, including our organs and our cells. All of that implies that the power that brought the universe into existence must be also intelligent and intentional. We weren't formed over millions and millions and millions of years just, you know, by coincidence. That's absurd. Also, think about the phenomenon of consciousness and the fact that as human beings, not only do we have consciousness, we are even conscious that we are conscious. Okay, I'm not sure dogs or fruit flies, you know, I'm not, I don't know the extent to which they're conscious, but I'm pretty sure they're not conscious that they are conscious, okay? So we are unique. Also, consider the existence of objective moral values like love and compassion and sympathy and so on. And also consider the innate value and purpose of human life. Everybody, including atheists, live as if their life had meaning and purpose, even though some of them want to play silly intellectual games and and claim that no, there is no real purpose and meaning in life and so on. But you'll notice they don't live their lives that way, do they? And furthermore, they want to prolong their lives as long as possible. Very few of them just check out prematurely through suicide or whatever. Now, if God were merely an explanation for what we do not know, in other words, if it were merely a matter of believing in the God of the gaps, as we used to say, as our knowledge grows exponentially, it would seem that God would decrease accordingly. However, the exact opposite is true. The more we learn about everything from cosmology to microbiology to the intricacies of the human brain, for instance, as well as the distinction between the brain and the mind, the more we realize how phenomenally complex the world is and how phenomenally complex we are as human beings. God's universe is so incredibly complex that we are left to bow in awe of the one who designed and created it and sustains it as well. I mean, that truly is the only appropriate and reasonable response. Now, like Anthony Flew, remember, I think in our first session or two, we started out talking about Anthony Flew, the most renowned, influential atheist philosopher, probably of the second half of the 20th century, and how he finally, through an honest pursuit of the realities of life, came to believe in a theistic God. Anthony Flew, like so many others, came to the realization that if they followed the facts and if they followed reason honestly, it inevitably would lead to God, whether they wanted it to or not. The nanoscientist James Tour of Rice University puts it this way. He says, only a rookie who knows nothing about science would say that science takes away from faith. He goes on to say, if you really study science, it will bring you closer to God. Okay. But that's for people that, take life seriously and so on. They're not just playing, egoistic, silly games. Yes, Bruce?
There's a common belief that, we're slowly pushing out the barriers of knowledge and we're covering all the stuff that we can know. So, but in point of fact, if you ask any scientist, when they answer one question, they get a dozen or 2 dozen more new questions. So in point of fact, the number of questions, the number of answers we have is becoming an increasingly smaller percentage of the questions that we could ask. And so we're never going to, now we add to our knowledge every year, every day, and if it all would agree, but there's just 10 more things that you don't understand. We discovered DNA, we don't know anything about epigenetics, then we discover epigenetics, then we discover the sugar code, and all these sorts of these incomprehensibly complicated things. And so it's like the expanding universe, it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So anybody who feels sort of, pardon the expression, overly sure of themselves, the possession of a good chunk of the universe's knowledge is deluding themselves.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think I'm correct, aren't I, that Charles Darwin believed that the cell was just full of kind of a jelly type substance. He didn't have a clue what exists inside the cell. So just punctuates the point you're making there. Now, the astrophysicist George Coyne puts it this way: nothing we learn about the universe threatens our faith. It only enriches it. So again, as Bruce was kind of implying, and we talked about this before, if you went back decades ago or 100 years or more ago, some people were arguing that the more and more that we understand the physical laws of nature, the less and less need we have for a God. Things that we used to attribute to God, now we know, well, that's just the way, those operate on the basis of natural physical laws. And yet at a certain point, you begin to realize that those so-called natural physical laws are so unbelievably complex that you start reversing the flow and building more and more and more of a case for the necessity of a God such as is revealed in Scripture. Most of you have read probably The Case for a Creator by Lee Strobel. Other than the book he wrote called The Case for Christ, this might be his most popular book. And Lee Strobel puts it this way about his personal testimony as a hardcore, arrogant skeptic who eventually conceded that there was nowhere else to go. He had to believe in the God of the Bible. This is how he puts it. I was once full of confidence that Darwinism justified my atheism. Boy, anybody that still believes that is so behind the times, it's unbelievable. He goes on to say, I felt I had investigated the issue sufficiently because, after all, I'd studied biology and chemistry, geology, anthropology, and other sciences. And I had read books that reinforced my beliefs. There was no doubt about it. Natural selection, acting on random variation, had put God out of a job. Goes on to say, when Christians approached me about the evidence for their faith, I was convinced that The Origin of Species, Darwin's first book, trumped the Bible. The critical thinking of scientists overpowered the wishful thinking of theists. To me, the case was absolutely closed. Only, simpletons believe in the Bible and God and so on. But then, prompted by the positive changes in my wife, after she became a follower of Jesus, I began to go beyond the obvious, to set aside my prejudices. I began asking questions that I'd never asked before, and to pursue the clues of science and history wherever they led. So like Anthony Flew, he's a guy who wants to follow the facts and reason to their logical conclusion. Instead of letting naturalism limit my search, I opened myself up to the full range of possibilities. And frankly, I wasn't prepared for what would happen. The facts of science systematically eroded the foundation of Darwinism, not theism, but Darwinism. The intellectual basis for my skepticism started to collapse, and my wide-ranging research was building an unexpected affirmative case for the existence of a creator. I was absolutely stunned. I felt like the wind was being knocked out of me. It was unnerving to wrestle with the implications. But on the other hand, I had vowed to follow the facts regardless of the cost. I realized that if I were to embrace Darwinism and its underlying premise of naturalism, atheism, I would have to believe that nothing produces everything, non-life produces life, randomness produces fine-tuning, chaos produces information, unconsciousness produces consciousness, and no reason produces reason. Well, again, he's implying, what came up earlier, and that is, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, basically. This stuff is just absurd. I was forced to conclude that Darwinism would require a blind leap of faith, and that naturalism had absolutely no credible explanation for how the universe came into being in the first place. This failure of the naturalistic Darwinist view opened the door to considering the other hypothesis that both the universe and the life in the universe contain are the products of intelligent design, of an intelligent designer. So we read in Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Astronomer, and by the way, former agnostic, Robert Jastrow puts it this way, and perhaps you've heard this before. This is, I think, one of the great quotes of our entire course, and we've had, numerous great quotes, but this one might top it all. So this is the astronomer Robert Jastrow, former atheist or agnostic, Robert Jastrow. Quote, "For thousands of years, people who have believed this statement have known the truth, which scientists have discovered only within the last 50 years. He goes on to say, for the rationalistic scientist, and I would add the rationalistic philosopher too. The story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. So those who believe in God, they've known this most of their lives, and going back for a couple of thousand years or beyond. And you know, however means it takes for us to get to the top, it's still a great joy when we get there. So the ultimate conclusion is essentially this. The Bible is all about creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing by an infinite God. It talks about the fall of humankind, our very selfish, innate orientation. It talks about redemption through ultimately the death of Jesus Christ, the atoning death of Jesus Christ. And the Bible talks about restoration of God's creation. There's an eternal, infinite, all-knowing, all-powerful God who created the universe and everything in it, including, for instance, us. And this God reveals himself not only in nature, but more specifically in his revealed written word, the Bible. So as we've talked about numerous times over the last several weeks, you know, there are the truths that can be gleaned from general revelation, what we call natural theology. But then God in his love for us apparently wants to convey far more truth and knowledge in specificity, and that's what we encounter in Scripture. Although created in the image of God, humanity has a fallen nature. We have a very egocentric nature. It's easy to recognize that in other people, isn't it? But anyway, it's that fallen nature that separates us from fellowship with our Creator. Jesus was God incarnate. He died a sacrificial death so as to restore us to fellowship with God and therefore fulfill our ultimate meaning and purpose in life. And that's the only way that we can, you know, achieve our ultimate purpose and meaning in life, is through total submission to God and his plan and design for us, rather than continuing to try and live like so many of these non-believers that Donna cited, who for them, all that matters is ego gratification in all of its myriad forms. So that's basically the summa of the course. And any comments or questions?
Jana Herman just interviewed Lee Strobel.
Oh, okay.
Side B. If you go to the C.S. Lewis website.
Okay.
Yeah, she's interviewing, and he goes through all of that.
Does he? Okay.
And then Andy Bannister. Andy Bannister has a link on the C.S. Lewis website, how to have panic-free conversations about Jesus.
Panic-free conversation. Yeah,
it
good.
came out,
And of course, one of the great masters of how to convey the truths of Christianity in a winsome and effective way is Greg Koukl, who we oftentimes cite as well. And so, you know, we need to know the truth, but we also need to be able to convey it in a way that's engaging and, you know, without compromising truth, but in a way that shows people that we care about them. And we're not just, you know, trying to pontificate, but we really care about the state of their soul. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, Bruce.
You know, when you look at that, you look at all these reasons why it seems to be incredible that people would believe other things, but we know they do, obviously. to me, the thing, I mean, I understand the emotional side and the volitional side. Those are very difficult psychological issues which you have to do with their upbringing and all kinds of things. But the part that always interests me is the intellectual side. Why is it that people who are very bright and very thoughtful can go so far astray, so easily? So if we've got a couple of minutes at the end, that's how you and I talked about the phone about the methodology and your metaphysics. And that's why people, we don't need to do it, but I mean, if you have 2 minutes, I'll talk.
Yeah, in fact, if you think it's appropriate to do it now, let's do it now. And then we'll still have 25 or so minutes where we can look at some of these speaking of practical apologetics, responding to skeptics. Well, that's the last 3 pages of your outline. So Bruce, go ahead and we'll.
It's my hobby horse. It's a good one. And we talked about this a little bit when I talked about arguments for the existence of God. But when we talk about these issues, is that if we don't believe in God, why do people believe so many incredible things? Where is it that they go so far astray? And how might you think about people who you meet who have these aberrant ideas? How much you talk about them? Let me grab my follow along. There's an American philosopher that most people haven't heard of by the name of Edwin Arthur Burt, who wrote a PhD thesis in the 1920s entitled The Metaphysical Foundations of Modern Physical Science. And I know that few people have read it, and I actually haven't. I've only read about it, but it's on my Christmas list, right? And I know many people who credit his insight, many extraordinarily good people, Donna like Edward Feser, credit his insights for a lot of the ways that they believe today. Feser's been a person very much in the forefront in returning us in a little bit to Aristotelian philosophy. But at any rate, for helping us understand the mess we're in the modern world and trying to frankly come to grips with a rational assessment of reality. That's the mess we're in. We don't seem to be able to get a very rational grip on reality. Burt's thought, as I understand it, was that we have confused metaphysics and methodology, which raises, of course, the question, I said this when we talked about the existence of God, what the heck is metaphysics? And the answer is simple and gigantic. It's nothing less than the study of reality, of all of reality. But before you tell me this is the role of science, let me share with you a somewhat different perspective. If you look at the world or the universe, if you prefer a larger canvas, and try to determine with no advanced opinions or presuppositions of what it is composed, what do you think you might find? Frankly, I think you would conclude that it's made up of both material and immaterial things. On the material side, you might take up physical reality, of course, and there's just a lot to include there. But when you finish your physical inventory of things, and comets and ants and cockroaches and all the stuff that the material world has for you, right? There will likely be a number of important things left over. Like what, you might ask? How could the material world account for human consciousness? How could it account for our moral compass, the depth of our interpersonal relationships, the ability of our minds to exhibit intentionality, which simply means for them to be at various times focused on or to be about something? I have a hard time thinking of a material thing as being about anything, right? And yet these are all aspects of the world, the universe, that your metaphysical research would be trying to get its arms around. We got the physical side, but there's all this non-physical, immaterial side as well. So once you've done that, so there seems to be a good case for both, right? The material and the immaterial side. Once you've done that, if you want to study one part or another, you might want to select a methodology to guide your research that seems compatible with the things that you intend to study. And so if you want to study the material world, you might select a materialist methodology. And this would, at least at the start, be particularly good at making sense out of the physical objects. Physical objects in motion, for example, you can abstract from their behavior to create mathematical formulas, and you can track the flight of a cannonball. And if you ever go to war, that will be very helpful to you, right? And so you continue on your way investigating the world with these tools. Now, if you're not careful, this approach can lead you astray, because if you in fact have never done your metaphysics, or if you have forgotten it, you will quickly fall into the trap of thinking that everything should be the subject of your materialist methodology. And that's a problem. But there's another problem bigger than that. You could begin to make claims for your analysis that get you to get you out of this dead end, thinking that you would ultimately be able to understand the things we associate with the immaterial world through your materialist methodology. But even if that, as time drifted by, turned out to be untrue, you could go further to decide that if something resisted your materialist investigation, perhaps it did not really exist at all. And believe it or not, we are now in the early 21st century treated to philosophers who claim that such things as consciousness, free will, and so forth, in fact, do not exist. That would seem to be both very radical and non-supportable. But it's the conclusion you reach if you come to believe that everything in the world should by rights be subject to your materialist methodology and the techniques of the scientific work that it supports. Right? Which brings us back to E.A. Burt, with whom we began the discussion. His insight, which is exactly what we are seeing today, is just this. If you do not do your metaphysics first, right, whatever methodology you settle on will itself become your metaphysics. It will begin to dictate to you what reality consists of. Right? And if that is true, you view the world in general, the entire world will be limited to the boundaries dictated by your methodology. And I think that is exactly what we are seeing today. Materialism, which started as a methodology, has become the metaphysics of our culture. So in what we call science, dictated by this methodology, there's no place for meaning, there's no place for purpose, there's no place for a moral compass, or even the independence of the immaterial mind from the material brain. The list of problems this has generated is almost unending, but includes some of the most confused areas of academic life. We can't seem to envision, much less find a clue to the origin of life, because we insist that it must be material. We're beset by browbeating about Darwinism and how we are products of pure chance because no God exists. We can only understand climate if we build a model of it, then we sacrifice our economic future on remediation that is not justified by those models. We cannot figure out how, if the mind and brain are somehow different, they could communicate. And so we decide that there really is no such thing as a mind, only brains, and that mind is something that the brain does when it gets complicated enough, through evolution, of course. And of course, there's no place for anything so out of the mainstream as a soul. After all, we've never found that with an experiment. And all these profound problems exist primarily because our culture has been captured by materialism. It began in the 1500s as a methodology, and now has become it's replaced our metaphysics. Right? A favorite contemporary philosopher of mine is Edward Faber. Donna knows of him. He says it's like taking your metal detector out to the beach for several hours. When you return, you have several metal artifacts that it has discovered. Your friends ask you if you found any wooden objects, but you reply that there were none because the metal detector did not detect them. Sounds pretty silly, but that's exactly what we do. Right? The astronaut Yuri Gagarin, the first guy to go into space, said he looked out the window, there was no God. And so as you talk about Christianity with a modern person, be prepared to encounter this idea that physical reality is all there is, and that science has demonstrated this beyond the ability of any other disciplines to contradict it. That is absolutely not true. But treat that person gently because they don't know what they're talking about. Thank you.
Responses? Come on, it's not letting all.
I only do Q's, Jeffrey. I don't do.
Oh, you just do the Qs and not
But
the
no, Bruce,
A's.
so you have the methodology of materialism. I mean, is there a methodology for the immaterial? Is that metaphysics? Or is
Theology.
we have another for the immaterial project?
Anything else? Any other? Yeah, that's very concisely, succinctly, and eloquently expressed. Gosh, I wish I'd brought it. you're probably like me and you get flooded with news stories and emails every week. And one came in a couple of days ago that I actually printed it out, but I was going to share it on a Sunday morning, not in this class. Does anybody know who Megan Rapinoe is? She's a very how do we put this? Very militant. I guess she wouldn't describe herself, but she's a very militant feminist, a lesbian, a very proud, a very aggressive lesbian, I might add. Well, she was playing in some tournament on some team. I don't follow her career, to say the least. And anyway, it was supposed, I mean, the implication of the article was this is sort of the climax of her career. And
Her last game.
And she, the article indicated she was going on from there, but she suffered a terrible injury. Again, I don't remember. I remember not having the article. Oh, a torn Achilles. Okay. And perhaps some of you read this same article I'm referring to, but she said that what she experienced, her injury, was proof that there is no God, because she still had, I guess, a great career ahead of her. And so the fact that if there were a God, he would not have allowed this to happen. And I don't, the little bit I know about her, has always been repulsive, frankly. But the very idea that she is a master of the universe, and the universe, by all rights, should revolve around her, her ego, her, career aspirations, and so on. I mean, it was, again, my apology. I should have thought to bring that article this evening. I mean, I was just absolutely astonished. And we know that the field of professional sports is full of people like that. But there's something about this article that just, to me, made it stand out more than ever. Oh my. So we, and it takes us back to some of the points we were making early in our class this evening. And that is, we would all like to believe that we are the center of the universe. If there is a God, he exists to serve us, not vice versa. So if you look there on page 30 in your notes, on to 32, there are 6 issues. Practical apologetics, responding to skeptics. And again, we don't have time to go into this in any real depth, but these are some prime issues that come up in a study like this. And if we had another session, we would have had time to go through this systematically. But let's look at these questions. First of all, the challenge that there is insufficient evidence for belief in God. Therefore, the burden of proof is on those who believe. Okay, you probably have heard that argument in the past, and so here's a critique of it. And again, if we had time, we could go through that. So, is the burden of proof on Christians to always have to make a conclusive case for what they believe? Or does the burden of proof work both ways? Isn't it equally applicable to non-believers? Don't they have to have rational, factual reasons why they don't believe? Why do we think that we have to assume it all, the whole burden of proof? Number 2, God should have provided more evidence or proof of his existence if he wanted us to believe in him. Okay. Among others, Blaise Pascal addressed that very directly, and we can go on from there. Number 3, if God created the universe, who created God? Now, this is oftentimes a question that comes from 6, 7, 8-year-olds, but there's an awful lot of adults who still think on this level as well. Who created God? Number 4, is there anything that God can't do? And so that, yes, yeah, absolutely. Sure. In other words, God can't make a square circle, can he? Because by definition, circles are not square. If you were to ask God, what does blue sound like or smell like? Well, I'm not sure that he would come up with a plausible response, because colors don't smell, do they? Number 5, if God is eternal, when in time did he create the world? Okay. Number 6, the Christian doctrine of the Trinity is illogical or irrational. And we work this into several of our courses. And if you're particularly interested in that, then I do have a short article that addresses that issue in particular. The Christian doctrine of the Trinity is illogical or irrational. How do we respond? And just some of the questions that came to mind as I was preparing this course. We do have just a few more minutes left. So why don't we look at the first one? I think actually I can probably do it justice in the few minutes we have left here. So there's insufficient evidence for the existence of God. Therefore, the burden of proof is on those who believe. How should we think about that? Now, this was a major thesis in Anthony Flue's book that he wrote way back in 1976 called The Presumption of Atheism. The presumption of atheism. This was long before he converted to belief in God. And later, of course, as you know, Anthony Flue rejected his previous work, such as The Presumption of Atheism and so on. But at the time, he thought that he had come up with a rather compelling argument. Now, more recently, the atheist George Smith has tried to revive the argument that religious skepticism is the sensible, neutral position. So sensible people don't take a side on whether there's a God or not, according to this view. They're apparently above all that, and they realize you can't prove either one, supposedly. So according to George Smith, the burden of proof is on religious believers. The skeptic is not obligated to prove anything. And again, this is a common assumption. And by the way, he wrote a book back in 1989 called The Case Against God. Okay. Now, this position, though, that he's taking is very flawed, very logically flawed, very defective. For those who declare there is no God, or we can't know if there's a God, they are in fact declaring a religious belief, and they should be required to defend what they're claiming here. First of all, the atheist and the agnostic positions are really not neutral positions at all. Atheists declare categorically that God does not exist. Agnostics declare categorically that we can never know if God exists, and they think that's more defensible and more modest. Well, it is slightly, because, as we've said before, the atheist position that there is no God, well, keep in mind, you can't prove a negative, can you? Okay. And so that's, and I think I used this illustration last night in our class at Mount Bethel. And that is that the atheists will oftentimes claim that belief in God is tantamount to believing in the great cosmic spaghetti monster who exists. And you've never seen a giant cosmic spaghetti monster, but you've never seen God either. So why believe in either one of them? And of course, the argument falls completely apart when you consider that there's very sound reasons, rationally and even factually, for believing in the existence of God. There's good reasons to believe that a God exists. There is absolutely no reason to believe that there's a great cosmic spaghetti monster. So it's totally the two are not in any way analogous. But anyway, that would be the view of the atheist. And the agnostic would say that, well, we can't know if there's a God, and we can't know if there's a giant spaghetti monster either. So neither of these positions, though, is supported by scientific facts or reason. Now, secondly, if the burden of proof is always on the one who believes in any idea, then the principle would also apply to the beliefs of atheists and agnostics. They have to provide plausible arguments as well for their disbelief in God. And thirdly, like atheists, agnostics argue that we shouldn't believe in God because there's no scientific proof for God's existence. But there's no scientific methodology for proving that only the scientific method proves truth also. Therefore, accept only what the scientific method proves is self-contradictory because it doesn't answer this question. Now, in fact, all worldviews and belief systems require faith. No sane person claims to have perfect, infinite knowledge. So everyone's beliefs rest to some extent or another on faith and on probabilities. The question is rarely ever, do our beliefs require faith, but rather, what is the supporting evidence for what we believe, say? Or is there any supporting evidence for what we believe? And which belief system, either belief in God or disbelief in God, which belief system is most rational and most factual? So the less factual and the less rational a belief system, the more faith is required to believe it. Therefore, atheism requires far more faith than Christianity. And a good source here would be the Norman Geisler and Frank Turek book that apparently some of you are reading in your book club. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. No. So the point is that we oftentimes think that we bear the total burden of responsibility for proving and arguing our point of view. No, the skeptic does too. And if you turn it on them, you realize they have nothing to offer, either rationally or factually. Okay. So the first question there's insufficient evidence for belief in God. Therefore, the burden of proof is on those who believe in a God. No, not at all. So again, if we had more time, we could go on from there, but I think the outline notes that I provided probably are somewhat sufficient to sort of guide your thinking on some of these other issues as well, such as God should have provided more evidence or more proof of his existence if he wanted us to believe in him. And here's, again, some basic issues that you can address. So, are we actually still have a few minutes, but any responses or questions or anything, John?
If I can speak in that, I think it was the 2022 Barnard survey about what the top objections were to believing in God and Christianity.
Oh, okay.
Number 1 and 2, and I don't know if they're in the right order. One of them was about evil and suffering.
Yes.
So it's evil. Why is First God was for evil.
Yes, uh-huh,
Frank Turek does an outstanding YouTube. It's on YouTube. It's called If God, Why Evil. It's
mhm.
really, really very watchable. And the other one was the hypocrisy in the church.
Oh, okay.
The 1 and 2
Uh,
objections. Why would I want to join with a
So-
bunch of people who are not even living what they believe?
So they've noticed, huh? Okay.
Yeah, but that's one of the ones that
Uh-huh.
all of the put together about 12 objections. And one of them was on hypocrisy in the church.
Yeah,
And it just, you're just not living what you believe, so why would I want to be with you because you're accountable.
hmm. And both of those are certainly answerable, to say the least. But we still need to take them very, very seriously, because yeah, those probably are two of the
Actually, he made-
top issues.
Yeah, he made the point that actually evil and suffering helps to support the
Yes.
case for God.
It does.
You know?
It does
How
indeed.
would you even know there was evil, like Bruce was talking about, about the meaning and value and morals
Mhm.
of life? So you wouldn't have any of those unless you had an intelligent designer that could build.
Well, why should we even think that certain things are right and wrong? Where's that come from? Or good and evil, or even appropriate and inappropriate, you know? So where do those ideas come from? Yeah, yeah. We have an entire course on the theodicy issue, the issue of reconciling the reality of God with the reality of evil. And of course, the skeptics will oftentimes argue that Christians are just simpletons because we believe that God is great, infinite even, and God is good. And yet, look at all this evil and suffering and hate and whatever. And so how can we possibly reconcile the reality of a great and good God and yet all this evil and suffering in life and so on? Very serious issue, actually. Mhm. Yeah. Anything? Yes, Bruce?
I find it often useful when you talk to people, first issue, Jeffrey talked about Greg Koukl, who has his book Tactics, which many of us have read. The primary issue of Greg Koukl is to ask questions and don't make assertions, because the person who makes an assertion immediately gets the problem of having to defend it. And so if you say, guy says, I don't believe in God, I can say, well, sit down, buckle your seatbelt, and I'll give you 7 reasons why you should believe in God. Well, that's not gonna go very far. But if you say to them, well, what kind of God is it you don't believe in, you know? And why don't you believe? You just quote, why don't you believe in it? It's always, and usually, once you've done this 3 or 4 rounds of this, 5 rounds of this, whatever, they'll say something that has the word should in it, right? My mother shouldn't have died young, or whatever the issue happens to be, you know, my father shouldn't have been an alcoholic, whatever. Then the question, once you've got that, you have a whole field opens up. Because where does this should come from? Is that simply your personal opinion, that that's how it should be, or do you think there's some reason behind the universe, which means that that shouldn't happen under normal circumstances? And then you're off and running in an entirely different direction. Because if it's just your personal opinion, then I don't know that you have much right to be upset that it didn't turn out to be what happened. If there's some objective moral standard or some objective standard to the world, then you might have a case. You might be able to learn more about what that is and why what happened to you and all those sorts of issues, which are much more adult and mature way to deal with that than to say. Yeah. Bill Craig used to say, you know, if God wrote "made by God" on every atom, there'd be people who say, who does he think he is? Right? And so you're just not going to get anywhere.
So if any of you know personally Megan Rapinoe, you might share what Bruce just related. She's actually not the center of creation, but that's how egomaniacs think, isn't it? So, well, yes. Here.
Yeah, she
Buddy.
said, you know, the fact that this happened to me 6 minutes in, you know, proves that there's no God. But then a little while later, she said, thank God I have a sense of humor.
Well, I think she was trying to be clever and coy. I can't imagine she even thinks there
Yeah.
possibly could be a God. Yeah, yeah, so. Well, thank you. Good being with you all, and those of you online. And we, as I said, we've covered an enormous amount of material. I think it all has a place in our Christian life and witness. And we'll be fairly soon converting all this to text that you could save and perhaps refer to when the occasion arises. So, but it's been wonderful working through all this with you. And so we are the most privileged Christians in all of Christian history, going back 2,000 years. And as we know, those to whom much is given, much is required. And we need to take it very, very seriously why, not only why the gift of salvation was offered to us and we accepted it, but also why did God choose to embody our souls at this time in history and in this particular nation, for instance. In many respects, the greatest nation in all of human history, although it's just being savagely destroyed from the inside. And so why are we here right now in this situation? You know, about 5% of the world population, 1 out of 20 in the world, have the privilege of living in America. And we are among that privileged few. So let's take it very, very seriously what it is, why we're here, and what our responsibility is. And we see that, as we've talked about before, how America is being repaganized. We talk about living in a, quote, post-Christian society and culture. Well, that's putting it lightly. And so we are called to be a source of light and love and hope and truth. So let's maximize the opportunities that we have. Like I said, we're the most privileged Christians who've ever lived. And with that comes great, great responsibility. So it's always just wonderful working with you all and knowing you. And so looking forward to continuing our studies. Next year, of course, we have the rumor is we have another election coming up. And all of this matters greatly because it has a direct impact on how millions of people live their lives and the quality of our lives here in America, but also as the only nation in the world that has any capacity whatsoever to affect world affairs in a positive way. Now, there's several countries that have tremendous power to affect world affairs in a negative way. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, many, many others. But America is the only one that has the potential to do good. But we need wise leadership. And so this upcoming election, extremely important. And let's understand that that's also a reason why God put us right here, right now. Okay. So in blessings, good being with you all. And those of you who've been joining us online, not so many tonight, but always good to see you as well. So blessings on your week. And
Blessings on your week.
Unique opportunity, and we have Mike Sabom and Steve Miller, both of them experts on deathbed experiences and near-death experiences, and they'll be here with us at Johnson Ferry upstairs in room 275. And great opportunity to hear two of the great thinkers, Christian thinkers on that topic. So join us if your schedule allows. Good being with you and good night.
All right, good night.